This is Dan Sachs. I'm the author of The $1 Million Greeting. I'm a consultant and the entrepreneur in residence at DePaul University in Chicago. And we're going to talk about empathy today, and perspective taking, and whether you're using it right, wrong, or not at all, and how you can use it better. So stay tuned for our show.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, today, we ask, have you ever gone for a night out and had it absolutely ruined by terrible service? Conversely, have you been having a pretty crappy night and it's turned around because you got fantastic customer experience? Well, on this episode, we're going to be taking an insider look at how we can all learn to be better in business by learning from the service industry. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any previous episodes inside Facebook, inside our Facebook group, by just going and looking up Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer to the show, strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, though, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really matters, I promise you. When you do, go over to Facebook into that group and tell us about it. Maybe we'll give you a shout out on a live show. If you want to catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States, we do that every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Las Vegas to Lancaster, Philadelphia. And you can also catch us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. If you're a regular listener, then a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And by the way, you can listen to us via Google Home or Alexa. Simply say, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, a C-suite leader, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, a leader in any capacity, you know that as business becomes more and more commoditized, it's easy for our business, for our brands to get lost in the shuffle. So how can we incorporate the very best of hospitality into not only our business, but also our leadership? Well, stay tuned, because our guest on this episode is Daniel Sachs. He is a professor at DePaul University School of Hospitality Leadership. He is an entrepreneur in residence at DePaul Coleman Entrepreneurship Center. He teaches classes on entrepreneurship and service leadership. He is the founder and owner of, is the founder and owner of Bin 36 Restaurants. Heard of that? I know I have. And a wine brand, after successfully opening his first restaurant in 1999. By 2005, they were shipping everywhere. Currently, Dan is a consultant on hospitality operations for private equity firms, large hotel companies, live entertainment, and hospitality operations. His experience working with executive teams as well as frontline makes him uniquely qualified to translate a strategic vision into an executable daily operations. Dan Sachs has been featured speaker for the National Restaurant News, the National Restaurant Association, Food and Wine Magazine, as well as at a number of Chicago events. He's the author of the best-selling book, $1 Million Greeting. The $1 Million Greeting, it focuses on the integrating hospitality practices across the service economy. Dan is a graduate of Lavagny, I believe is the pronunciation, culinary school in France, and Harvard University. Put your hands together and help me welcome an entrepreneur and professor, Mr. Dan Sachs.
That was pretty nice. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. Now, your book is The $1 Million Greeting, today's best practices for profit, customer retention, and a happy workplace. So let's jump in, if you will. What are some of the tools of hospitality that apply directly to all business? Because it might be easy for somebody watching, listening to us and say, I'm not in the hospitality business. I don't get why this guy's on here. Tell us, what are some of the things that really translate?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Dov, and thanks for having me on
My
podcast.
pleasure.
I think when we think about the word hospitality, it means a lot of different things to different people. And some people think of it in the context of staying at a hotel, or maybe they think about it and going to a restaurant, or just a very typical service experience. But I think really, when you boils down to it, it's really about understanding how you can empathize with somebody else. And empathy is a big catchword. We could talk about that for an entire podcast in and of itself. But the idea that you can start to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, whether it's your internal customer, your employees, or your external customers, or even your shareholders, and be able to see the world from their point of view. It's the first step in hospitality. That's sort of the baseline. But then it's figuring out, how do I act on that? What things can I do as a leader that can affect change within my organization to improve the experience of my employees, my customers, and my shareholders? And that, to me, is really what hospitality is about. And so when you think about it in that context, it absolutely applies to all kinds of businesses, whether you're a hardware store or a restaurant, or Zappos, one of the books that was one of the companies featured in the book that I wrote. So, I think those tales really resonate with a lot of different people.
Sure. Well, on this show, we've spoken a lot about the power and value of being an empathetic leader. And in truth, most leaders seem to, at least secretly, struggle with understanding how to apply empathy. And I know you are currently working on a project that looks at empathy traits in business. Can you talk more about that and what you found?
Absolutely, yeah. This is a fascinating story, actually, because the truth is, I would argue that we're misnaming empathy completely. That empathy has become this sexy word that's in every conversation about transformational leadership or emotional intelligence. And nobody, I think, really understands at its core what empathy means. And in fact, I use it sometimes because it is that catch-all phrase. But empathy implies an emotional connectivity. What we're really talking about, and something that's sort of the kissing cousin of empathy, is perspective taking. And at its core, perspective taking is really what we as leaders look to in an effort to try to understand the person across the table from us, customer, employee, etc., and where they're coming from. Because perspective taking applies to task-related changes we were looking for. Empathy requires emotional connectivity. And as leaders, that can be really draining over time if you're really trying to emotionally connect with all the people in your universe. So I like to think of trying to, and sometimes that makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes it's important to connect empathetically with an employee or a customer. Although, again, you stop me when I get too detailed here, I hope. But so, for example, given empathy's sort of neurological, emotional relationship to ourselves in our traits, I can't empathize with my daughter, for example, or even my wife on many issues because I'm not a woman. Some things I can empathize with my wife about my daughter, but not empathize with my wife about how she feels about her job, et cetera, et cetera. Certain characteristics I can't. However, I can perspective take. I can step out of myself, my own view, and think about how somebody is seeing it from their point of view. And then, because I'm not emotionally involved, I can think about solutions around trying to solve certain issues that might come up. And this happens at work all the time. Negotiation is the perfect example. Always, I read these articles in Harvard Business Review or in Inc., your favorite magazine, or Forbes, or wherever, where people are talking about empathizing with the person you're negotiating with to understand them better. It's the worst thing you can do, right? Because if you empathize with them and you become emotionally connected to them, then it's very difficult for you to be a tough negotiator. However, if you perspective take, you get rid of the emotion, but you understand where the other person's coming from, it gives you huge amounts of leverage to then think through solutions and solve your issues much more effectively.
So
and
you've gone into something here that's very interesting because, as you said, empathy is a new sexy thing to talk about, and something that we've talked about for 30 years.
Sure.
And I think it's incredibly valuable. But you've created this new sort of category of that because empathy is about emotion. And people don't actually understand that. It's one of the reasons that I think that so many leaders struggle with empathy, because they've learned that, oh, I'm supposed to, if I'm going to be a leader, I have to be objective.
I'm going to cry with all my
employees. And now you're asking me to cry with my employees. I don't get it. Right? But what you're talking about is this removing the emotional piece and stepping back, but with but it's not cold and objective. It's willing. So see, and I think this is the polarity, right? So people say, I'm empathetic, therefore I'm holding you and we're weeping together, or I'm this cold ass who's not empathetic. And this middle ground that you're talking about here is this step back and saying, hold on a sec, let me put myself in your shoes, even if I can't feel it. What does it look? And I use this context all the time. Is if I put your lenses on, what do I see? And it's how do I see the world? I see it differently. I'm never going to understand menstruation. I'm a man. But I can go, well, I can understand how that changes the chemistry of your brain, because it changes, because men go through what men don't even know is they go through andropause, and we go through androcycles every month when our testosterone goes up and when it goes down, and it changes our moods as well. So men have period pains too. We're moody bitches.
That's definitely outside my expertise.
Well, but it's a great example of that. This is, we can move into a place and still have a little bit of objectivity. And I think that, what you're talking about here is something that's quite unique, quite unique in for me, the controversial piece here is when empathy is not appropriate, and that it's not in negotiating in the context of which we fully understand empathy. And I fully understand empathy and know what it is and know how to teach it and how to get people to go to it. But for some people, they don't understand that there is a middle ground. I can have full empathy for you without fully embodying your feelings. And what the trick is for people to understand, the analogy I have people understand is there is empathy and there's being an empath. One is very good, one is very bad. I know I was a child, I was an empath. I learned from my mother to carry her emotions. So when my mom was sad, I was sad. That was being an empath. We take on the feelings of another. And that's what a lot of leaders are afraid of. They go, well, I'll just be drained, like you talked about. Right. But being empathetic in the context of which you're talking about it, I've got that great objectivity. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that's something that is enormously valuable for our viewers and listeners to really give themselves permission to take the hook out and go, oh my God, it's not so terrible. I'm not such an asshole. I'm a social.
Absolutely, and it's not just like comes out of thin air. This is, there's been a lot of research on this, and it is absolutely worthwhile to think about it in that framework. It's a honest to goodness, genuine get out of jail free card if you don't want to think about empathy in a way that is completely legitimate, and I think really productive, because most of us don't have the time or the resources to be fully empathetic as you described. So we need to think about the workplace and how we interact with our employees and our customers in ways that allow us to have the energy to be effective across the board, not just in one moment with one employee in one time. And that's a challenge for all of us, because time in and of itself is such a core value when you're a leader. So understanding how to be efficient about it is really important.
Now, the reason that I believe that empathy has become such a big focus is because millennials want to be understood. It's a very important thing for them. They want meaningful work, and they want to be understood. They want to know that they have a voice, and they want to know that you as in the boss, you as in the leader, are listening. You say that millennials are not as different as we think from previous generations. Tell us about that.
I definitely agree with that. I think people are people, and our human nature is generally the same generation to generation, and the things that we value are equally the same. Some of the things that have changed, however, are the technology and sort of the leadership dynamic within organizations in general. So we've left the traditional top-down leadership construct where, your boss told you to jump and you jumped as high as your boss told you to come in on Saturdays, you came in on Saturday, whatever it was. I think what's changed is that millennials, because they have access to information very easily, are asking questions. It's not that they don't want great leadership. It's not that they don't want structure and direction. It's not that they don't want goals. They just want communication. And what they really want, at least, again, from my own personal experience and people I've worked with, is they want leaders who are authentic and leaders who are accountable. And if you can master those two elements in terms of the relationship with your employees, then you're in great shape. And the truth is, I would argue that 20, 30 years ago, people wanted authentic and accountable leaders. It's just the way we thought about it was different. So it's very easy to say, oh, millennials are this, or millennials are that, or they don't want this or that. They're so different. We have to handle them so differently. I don't really think that's true. I think what we have to do is understand the context differently. And that maybe requires us to be a little bit more communicative, but doesn't require us to set different goals or have different expectations. And in fact, millennials that I work with, I find, are extraordinarily engaged and extraordinarily competent. So if you can sort of harness that relationship, you have a lot of upside potential.
Yeah, I think millennials are awesome. I love them to bits. I've often described them on this show as baby boomers with balls.
Yeah, that's great. Can I use that?
Absolutely. Give me credit. It's good. But it's true, because baby boomers said we're not going to work for the man, and we did, and we became the man. But millennials are saying, I'm going to work for somebody who's an ass, and I'm going to start my own business for $20 with the URL. And that's what I love about them. So they don't have to put up with those things. But I think what you said that I really want people to grasp, because people will argue with, well, millennials are different. And okay, you can argue certain things, but as you said, there are certain human traits that are going to be there across generations. But one of the things you said that I think people have got to grasp is that my generation, the generation before me, would have said the same. We're vastly different. But what you said, I think, is the point that so many miss, is, are we different, or is the technology we're using different? Because I know when I was a kid and I was doing homework, if I was doing homework and I had the record player on, I was told to turn the music off because it was distracting. Now, kids have 3 screens going, one earbud in while they're listening to music, they're chatting with their friends and doing the homework and doing better than I did at school.
Much.
So it's a different technological understanding. And do I think it's still important to have eye-to-eye connection and meet people? Of course. And I still think relational values are probably the highest thing that we need more than anything. But this understanding, I think, really like what you said there about understanding that it's not anything more than just look at the technology that's available to them. Because if I wanted to talk to you not that long ago, I had to pick up a phone to talk to you. But I only wanted to say something that was probably 9 words. Well, now I can text. When text came along, I thought, this is stupid. Just pick up the phone.
I know.
Right? Just pick up the phone. And now I text like a lunatic, right?
Right.
I'm always texting. But
Although I will say, every once in a while, I do say to my kids, pick up the phone. Because to your point, understanding the value of that human connection, that's the risk. And that's where I think leaders have the opportunity, great leaders have the opportunity, is that they recognize and they leverage the tools, but they also know when to step back and take advantage of that genuine, authentic relationship, one-on-one, one with a group, and create those kinds of bonds that are really meaningful.
Absolutely. Now, we were talking before about this crossover between hospitality and the service industry. And one of the things that, we're talking more and more about in leadership is that you have internal customers and external customers. Your internal customers are, of course, your team, your talent. So why does a great customer service strategy start with them, from your point of view? Why does it start with employees and not with customers? Because that's the way most people think of it.
Right. I actually take it even one step further back. I say as a leader, it starts with your own vision, your own understanding of what your organization is going to be and what your goals are, and setting those out clearly. The next step is then, how do I source? How do I find the people that are going to be part of my team? So even before you worry about how you're going to negotiate or navigate your employees, it's how do you figure out the right employees to hire? And I think that's a challenge because, especially right now with the labor market as tight as it is, people are hiring anybody that's got, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a beating heart. And the reality is that there's rarely congruence between the vision of the company, the idea behind why we got into business in the first place, and the type of people we're hiring. And that's a huge disconnect, because if you don't start there, and that, again, this is not a hospitality issue, this is a leadership issue across industry. If you don't start there, you're never going to build a team of people that understand and push your vision forward. It's just going to constantly be like you're Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill. And so I really suggest to the people I work with to think, step back, because I think the other challenge is everybody wants to go. If I don't get my idea to market right away, somebody else is going to steal this idea and I'm the next Steve Jobs. And the reality is that, the homework you do on the front end, the working through your vision and understanding it, hiring a team of people that believe in what you're interested in doing, and then moving forward from there and building a culture in your company that creates that sense of community, that's what gets great organizations from level A to level B. And that's hard work, and that takes time, and it takes consistent effort. And so that's where I think a lot of leaders struggle, is to really believe like in this non-revenue generating part of work to spend the resources to get it right. But the companies I know that get it right in the beginning, they make money hand over fist in the long run. They're playing the marathon game, not the sprint game.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important thing to understand. Our work, the work that myself and my company that we do as consultants when we go in and work with a company, all our work is around purpose. We're helping people to find purpose. And most people don't know what purpose is. They think their mission is their purpose, and mission with a lick of paint is still mission with a lick of paint. It's not purpose, because purpose is deeply emotionally driven and it bonds people together. And I know that for you, in your work, you talk about it a lot, about even in the book, about the need for purpose and being a purpose-driven organization. Tell us more about why you think we need to be purpose-driven leaders and have purpose-driven organizations.
That's a long, I could do a podcast on that too. I think, there are several different layers to that question. There's the individual layer, like what gets me up in the morning, and why is it important to me as a human to move my own journey forward. So that's one layer. And I think that that's critical for all of us. That's the opportunity I believe millennials have gifted to us in their inquiry, is that they've forced us as leaders to rethink the paradigm around why we get up in the morning and go to work. So that's very powerful. But the truth is, from my experience, and this is a very personal story, is that I really found that I got up in the morning and was motivated to do the work that I did in the restaurant business because of the people around me, because the people I worked with, my employees, my second family. And when I was effective, most effective, was that when we were all on the same page and understood the value of why we came into our restaurant business in the first place. And that really drove me to build my business and expand my business and grow in ways that I had never thought I would before I got started, because I wanted to continue to support all the employees in the company. And that was extraordinarily rewarding, both financially rewarding as an organization and for the people that work there, but also really in my own sort of a personal way, very rewarding for me as a leader to see the growth with the people around me. And it never was about the bottom line, although that sort of worked itself out in the end. And maybe I was super lucky and that just happened to be how things, the chips fell. But I felt like if I came to work every day with this sort of sense of purpose around what I was there for and the people that I was working with, then the rest of it really was much easier to execute in terms of getting people to, everybody on the same bus and us all going in the same direction. So that became a mantra for me as a person. Even when my passion for operating restaurants started to wane, the enthusiasm and the feelings I had for my employees drove me to come to work every day, even when I didn't want to, deal with the next crisis of who knows what in the restaurant business. You can imagine there's more than enough to go around. But it really sustains you. And what I've learned is that we can do lots of tasks for a long period of time. That's what the Army is so good at. But there has to be this self-generation in terms of our own feelings about what motivates us. And the challenge, as we all know, of being a leader is that you're giving. And so your well runs dry after a while. And that's almost biological, right? It's the idea you were talking about with empathy. If you give and you're empathetic all the time, nobody's refilling your tank. You're in trouble. You're going to run dry. You'll just be out. So if you build an organization that is purpose-based, where your employees and you are all driving toward the same vision, they'll replenish your tank time and time again. And that is just a magical situation.
Yeah, again, it's what we teach, and I can't emphasize enough the power of purpose to people, but I don't think that people, it's fascinating for me because I see companies like you talked about Zappos and you talk about companies like that, and there are many, many wonderful companies. We've worked with many of them and actually help them to develop their purpose. And the ones who go, you know what, we're not going to worry about what it costs to get the purpose. We're not going to worry about the bottom line. We're just going to see what happens. And invariably, their profits go like this. Now, that's not my opinion. That is now researchable, that the stock value goes up about 1,200% better, 1,200% better in a purpose-driven organization than a non-purpose-driven organization that is tactical and strategic. So This is why it's so important, because people are bonded. They, as you said, they get out of bed in the morning, not because they've got to go to a freaking job. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, oh yeah, I get to pay the rent. It's like, yeah, I don't want to go to work, but I have to pay the rent. That's different. It's not, woo, I'm excited to pay the rent. So it's got to be something bigger. And if we don't create that as an organization, we will fall apart very fastly. Now, in the context of that, you talk about 3 styles of management in the book. Can you sort of touch on each of those and explain their meaning and how they actually lead to success?
Yeah, I think there are. That's a good question. So there are one of the things that came out of this book. So I have to step back, and then these different sort of leadership styles will make more sense. One of the things that came out of this book is that and I think one of the challenges that you bring up is that it's very difficult to quantify the value of purpose, the value of customer service, the value of these sort of we'll call them soft terms. And so that's what creates this tension between leaders and people like us who want to sort of push this idea, right? And that's understandable, especially if you're a public company. One of the companies I work with is a publicly traded company, and they have quarterly earnings. And to explain to them that they have, this 3-year road they're going to go down, the CEO tells me, he's like, "You're out of your mind. There's no chance. That's just not doable. Let's do what we can, very actionable." So one of the things that came up was when I talked to folks, and we talked about customer service and vision, it sort of trickled into this idea. It was almost like religion or like God. It was like one of those things that they knew was out there, they knew was important, but they could not really put a finger on exactly what it was. They couldn't measure it. And so they decided they were just going to pursue it on faith, that it was simply that they just had to trust. And so the first section of leaders are the evangelists. They are the true believers. They are the ones who are through and through their organization, from top to bottom, are following through on all these ideas around a business of purpose to the nth degree. They will do everything to engage in that area, regardless of what the financial implications are, whether it's practical, impractical, etc. So that group of passionate followers I call the evangelists. But then there are folks who are sort of like, they sort of believe it, they sort of buy it, but they're not 100% sold. And they realize that it sounds good, they want to believe, but they're not sure. So we call those transformers, those people who are sort of like in between. They can't decide whether they're on the bus or off the bus, but they know the bus looks pretty good. So, they're going to do what they can.
Put some snacks on that bus.
Right, exactly. So, and then we have the pragmatists. Those are my leaders who own large organizations, who are either CEOs of public companies or of multi-unit, big, large-scale organizations. And I interviewed 3 in each of these categories in the book. And those folks absolutely know the value. They're smart people. They understand the value of having a purpose-driven organization, but they've got 110,000 employees. And so they're looking at it as very realistic ways that they can implement, make small changes over. They're turning the Titanic. They don't have a sailboat. So, those folks, they get it, they understand it, they can't quantify it, they know their shareholders won't stand for it, so they've got to think about creative ways of moving things along. And so there's this sort of interesting religiosity around it. I'm personally not a religious person, but it was interesting to me that all these leaders had this view. And so we put them into these buckets because it really felt like they fell into certain categories about how they saw the world.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at this, the research, as I talked about with the 1,200% increase in stock values, those companies are the companies that lasted. And so what we see in that is that they are companies that actually started out doing purpose on faith with no evidence whatsoever, and have outlasted the companies who said this is intangible, we can't go along with this, and who have disappeared. And we often forget that if you look on the S&P 500, that a very small percentage, I think it's something like 11%, are the same 11% that were there 30 years ago. The biggest companies in the world that we get to name are companies like Apple and Google and Facebook, and Amazon didn't exist 30 years ago. So it's like, and every one of them talks about what is their purpose, not just their mission, but their purpose and why they're actually on the planet. And I think, we got to start paying attention, but at the same time, there are always going to be those who are going to hold back. So let's move on from that, because in the book, you talk about your 5-step $1 million greeting roadmap, right? So to help entrepreneurs and businesses create their own success story, can you just sort of give us an overview of that? I realize that's a big subject. There's a lot to that.
Sure. Well, it not surprisingly, most of the terms have come up as we've been talking. And I think one of the things I've come to realize is that despite best efforts and good intentions, there is a lot of learning out there around task-specific responsibilities and how to change this behavior and how to build an organization technically. There is really not a lot of good learning on what makes a great leader. What are the key components to great leadership? Partially because it's a lived experience, right? You live and learn and you change your behaviors. And partially because there's so much literature out there that it gets all conflated. And so as a leader, it's very difficult to sort of parse specific ideas that you can incorporate in your organization and know that they make sense and that they're doable, they're attainable, they're logical. Mm-hmm. So there were these 5 principles that bubbled up both in my own experience as a leader, but also through these companies. And again, the companies in this book range from Hyatt Hotels, it's 125,000 employees, to this place in Chicago where I live called Nick's Pizza and Pub, is 100 people. So a wide variety of companies. Some are in the hospitality sector, some like Zappos are obviously not. And there were these 5 themes. So one is this idea of purpose or vision, right? That's a no-brainer. We talked about that, easy peasy. Then the 2 others, which I also alluded to, are this idea of authenticity and accountability. And I think those pair together nicely because they speak to who you are as an individual leader, how people will see you, how your employees will see you, how your customers will see you, how your shareholders will see you. It's the do what I say what I do theory of being a leader. Very often goes by the wayside, and understandably so. Again, so much is understandable in how people are pressed for time. They don't prioritize this idea of accountability and authenticity, although it is clearly a significant value for employees. So remind me to come back to what employees value, because that often gets mixed up with compensation, and I definitely would love to talk a little bit about that. So the other 2 components, which are more paired toward the idea of creating this purpose culture and this vision, is the idea of culture, corporate culture. What does that mean? And how do I take my vision and create an organization that embraces a culture that we commonly understand, that everybody, you ask 100 people in the company, 99 of them are going to say the same thing about what we're here for, and we all are working in the same way. And it doesn't have to be we're here to make widgets, or we're here to sell beds, or we're here to, whatever, do the next .com brilliant idea. It's about how do we all act together. Right. And then the last piece of the puzzle, which I think is often overlooked, but is super important in terms of the longevity you talk about, is understanding where you fit in your community, both your local community and your business community. So how do I create ties, especially if you're a bricks and mortar shop, within the area that I live in, so that I'm not just internal. I'm not just doing stuff within, but I look outside, look to the bigger picture. How do I support my community? And then also, if you're a .com company or you're a multinational company, is how do I understand the greater business community, my B2B partners, other people, and how do I support them in a way that is effective so that we build, the rising tide raises all ships. I really actually believe in that. And I celebrate those successes when I can. So when I look at successful leaders, they sort of understand, they may use different terms and they may define it differently, but they're doing these 5 things consistently, and they really get the value of them. So I push those 5 terms and I adapt them to whatever company I'm at, whatever vocabulary they use, but those are critical. So if you give me just one more minute, come back to this idea.
I want to come back to it, and I'm not going to let that go because it is okay. Important. But what we got to look at here is, so you've got to be a purpose-driven organization that creates a vision. That's, we got to have that, and it appears elusive, but it actually has a bottom line to it that's very clear. On top of that, you have to create a culture, and I'm going to come back to that as I bring in what you were just wanting to talk about. You have to create a culture that people are aligned with, and we actually have to spend the time to make sure that people are purpose fit and a culture fit, because both of those things have to go together, and that is vitally important. But in order to create that culture fit and the purpose fit, you actually have to know what are the values of the organization. And know the values of the organization, you've also got to know the value of the people you're bringing in, not as in what they can do, but what is it they value. And one of the things I love about millennials is they're willing to say, here's what matters to me, right?
Yep.
And we've learned a lot from that because, as you were saying earlier, we've lived, particularly those of us who are over 40, 48, 49 years old, have lived in a world where we believe that you keep people loyal by giving them more money. And what we know is millennials will leave a job to go to another job that's less money, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's because it's what matters to them, it's what they value and what's important to them. And money is important, but only to a point. And I know that's where you wanted to go. So let me just help you to dive into that one.
Yeah, you just stole my thunder. That's exactly right. I think that is one of the big misconceptions is that money drives decision making. And of course, as long as employees feel that they are fairly compensated relative to others in the same industry or the same job, then money becomes significantly less important. And it's really about the other behaviors you and the other and the culture you create as a leader that employees value. And I think we just miss that mark so often, because one of the greatest things that employees do value is fairness and justice at work. And when you are not able to understand that, that's when people start to feel disenfranchised. And to bring the topic all the way around, empathy is actually an area where you can get in trouble with that. By expressing too much empathy to one person, it might feel to somebody else that you are neglecting them. And so that justice aspect gets out of whack. Whereas perspective taking allows you to be equal with everybody. And that has a lot of value for employees, because outside of pay, which again, super important, but as long as it's reasonable relative to other people, is less important. It's about being fair at work and treating everybody under the same umbrella with the same level of attention, respect, understanding that we're all part of this one very important culture together.
So let me push back a little bit on that, Daniel, because you talk about fairness and justice. Incredibly subjective. Incredibly subjective. You're not treating me as well as you treat that person. That's a subjective opinion. And we as leaders, we bang up against that all the time. This is not fair. Well, you're an entitled little shit. That's not fair either. or you think, or you think you should have this, but that's not fair either. And justice is, well, who is the final judge in this situation? So I think that we're in a very nebulous area here, because when we talk about fairness, there's equality and there's fairness, and those things are different.
Yes.
And then justice around that. You and I can have a philosophical conversation about that. It can go for an entire hour on its own. But this is an important piece that I think that leaders who are looking at this dance with empathy that you talked about, and I think it's, again, I said at the beginning, it's a very important point, the distinction between empathy and perspective. And I think that that's where we can learn how to do fairness and justice, rather than doing it from a place of empathetic justice. Empathetic fairness will often come and bite you in the ass.
Right. So I think we're actually probably not as far apart as maybe I described it or you're thinking, because I agree with exactly what you're saying. And it's just, from my experience, leaders who are aware that those dynamics exist, that those constructs exist, are much more adept at navigating through that water, because they understand where and when they're leveraging the tools to the best results. So that's really the most important part.
And I want to give our leaders right now a tip on that. And the tip on that, I want to give you, like right now you're going, well, how the hell do I navigate this? Seems like very intrepid waters here. And the answer to it is this: don't tell, ask. So listen, Susie, Bob, Fred, Ethel, whoever it is, what would seem fair to you right now? Ask them that. That is going to tell you and show you whether they're wackadoo or whether they actually can step back and have a little bit of objectivity. Whether they're just all about them and that, you know, that they don't get it, or whether you can actually have, and if you actually, most of the people who work for you, 99% of them are going to be brilliant and wonderful. And when you ask them that objective question, you actually move them out of their own emotional place where they can go, yeah, well, I guess what would be fair is this. Oh, okay, that's doable. Let's do that. And then we're like, everybody's like, oh, that's great. But I think that we as leaders, so often we impulse, we try to fix it. Impulse, we try to come up with a solution. And guess what? The person with the problem has got the best solution. If not the final one, the best one overall, certainly the seeds to it. So my tip to all of our viewers and listeners here right now is don't tell, ask, and get your lead from there. Because if you get your lead from there, that will navigate you right through the intrepid waters.
Exactly. That'll bring us to the next podcast, which is listening.
That's a whole nother subject. So let's, as we sort of moving towards the latter part of the show, you know, you had the restaurant business. You were very successful in that. The wine business, you were very successful in that. You come from this background of hospitality. Share with us, what was a turning point in your life, in your leadership or / business philosophy?
Yeah, well, it's two things sort of happened to me simultaneously. Fortunately for me, fairly early on, I had a mentor, as good luck happened. I had a few things. I could tell some off-color stories too, but two things that happened. One was when I first started out, I was trying to figure out sort of what my strategy was and how I was going to develop the business. And I was talking to this guy who was my mentor, been in the business a long time, and he turned to me after I went on this, half-hour thing about blah, 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 blah. And he turned to me and he looked at me and he said, Dan, famous saying, now, hope is not a strategy. Because I was not being specific and thinking about how I was making plans as a leader. And those plans, some of them were about the future of my business. Some of them were about how I was thinking about my employees. It was about all the different aspects of being a leader and running a business. And so often we don't take the time and require of ourselves to work on the parts of our business we least like to work on, the stuff that's the least fun. For me, it was thinking about my financial statements and strategically planning for the next 2 to 3 years. And I would say to my mentor, well, I'm hoping this, and he would stop me dead in my tracks and say, hope's not a strategy, Dan. What are you going to do? So that was one significant turning point to me. The other came from my wife, who is phenomenal, but who early on, who is an investment banker, right? Smart woman who knew more about money than who's forgotten more than I'll ever know. And she would talk to me about my business. Never been in the restaurant business, never waited a table in her life. Her closest is going to Starbucks. But she would have advice about how I could think about my business in ways that I found initially very difficult to stomach, because she didn't know my unique unicorn of a business. She thought how could she possibly understand? And what I came to realize is that business is business is business, and people that don't share your perspective, people that will come to you and challenge you to think about your business differently because they come from outside your business, are the keys to giving you great insight on how your business runs. And it took me a long time to embrace that, because my ego was not insignificant when I started my first business. And so having somebody from the outside try to tell me how I could do it better took a long time for me to appreciate that. But those two things, this idea that hope is not a strategy and the idea that you need outside people to come in and tell you the hard truths and then be willing to embrace those hard truths, are two real critical components. And
those are great insights. I couldn't agree more. And it is getting your own ego out of the way. You know, I've got a video series that's on YouTube, and it's called New Leadership Skills, the skills you'll need as a leader moving forward. And one of the things I talk about is we've all been fed this idea of surround yourself with like-minded people. And I said, it's terrible advice. Terrible advice. Because they'll all blow smoke up your skirt.
Yeah.
And you've actually got to put yourself around people who don't think like you, who will actually challenge you. And particularly if you're bright, if you're really bright, you've also, there's a certain amount of intellectual ego that goes along with that. And for somebody to say, listen, you're full of shit, and you really need to look at this differently. And you know, but you don't understand my love of service. Well, you know what? You're going to go bankrupt serving everybody. So,
exactly.
And that's a hard golf ball to swallow, but it is vital. It's the reason that people bring me into work with a family business, and they say, you know, we're a $300 billion company. I go, that's great. And they go, do you come from a background of a massive wealth? And I go, absolutely not. And they go, oh, well, why are you here? Because I don't. Right. I have a perspective you will never have. I can see what you can never see. And that is the whole point. That's why they bring people like you in, because you can see things that other people can't see. I can see things that other people can't see. And that is why we have to have objective outside mentors, consultants, coaches, guides in everything that we do. And that's such a great turning point for you to actually get that. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. What was one thing that you used to do that you thought was really good that probably blocked you from your success?
There's only one thing?
Well, you can pick one. I'm sure there's a couple.
Okay, I'll give you another, I'll tell you a story. And I learned this fairly early on too. And it was a challenge for me, but it feeds into everything we're talking about. So when I first got started, this is in 99, 2000, I opened this second restaurant that I had opened. It was a giant restaurant, 12,000 square foot restaurant, and it was immensely popular from day one. We were super busy, crazy busy. I barely working 24 hours a day. I barely had enough staff. It was like a scramble all the time. About 3-4 months in, maybe 5 months in, one of my managers, it's her birthday, and she has a birthday party after work, Saturday night. It's like 2 in the morning, whatever. For some reason, my wife and I were not invited. But the entire staff is invited to her house. It gets worse, believe me. So there's this birthday party. It's 2 in the morning. Everybody's partying, and the whole thing turns into a giant orgy. Probably better that my wife and I were not there. But not only is there a giant orgy, but the orgy is in the front half of the apartment where this party is. So every single person is forced to walk past the orgy on their way to the back part where people are hanging out, drinking, and God knows what else they're doing. So the reason I found out about this is because a line employee the next day comes to me and says, I just saw my manager ass up in this orgy. How can I possibly respect her to discipline me going forward, right? And so I'm like, oh my God. And at that point, we did not have a robust employee manual outlawing orgies, among other things. And I got on
those things you don't think you actually have to put in.
Right.
Asterisks, no orgies.
Right.
If you're seen ass up at an orgy, you will be fired.
Right.
Right?
So, restaurant business. But in any event, and then of course, a couple other complaints bubble up. And these are employees, they're super great, these line employees. And I get on the phone with my attorney because I'm like, holy what am I going to do here? I got a serious problem. And I'm talking, I describe the whole thing, and I say, and he says, you got to fire these managers, that's just inappropriate, et cetera. And I say, well, I can't, we're 5 months in, I don't have enough people as it is. I can't afford to fire blah, 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 blah. And he skips a beat and he says, Dan, the cemetery is full of indispensable people. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? Because it took me a minute to sort of embrace it. But what he was really saying is that, you know, you've got to make the difficult decisions around your employees. And those who don't understand the culture and the kind of environment you're creating, they've got to go no matter how difficult it is. There is nobody that is indispensable in your organization. And you need to understand that the short term, the running a business is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the short-term pain you're going to feel is nothing compared to the long-term pain you would feel if you don't make the necessary changes. So, you know, for better or worse, not having gone to the orgy, hearing about it only secondhand, it did end up giving me this great perspective on the importance of making those kinds of tough decisions to make sure that you establish a culture and an organization that you can be accountable to, and the value that creates for the employees that remain over the long haul.
Fantastic. That's very insightful. That was really good. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. Now,
Yeah.
as we sort of roll towards the end of the show here, as a leader, all of us, particularly those of us that consider ourselves conscious leaders, we're all committed to our growth. And as successful as you are, and you know, you've obviously been very successful, what's the one thing that you're still working on in your development, in your leadership development?
I hate these "what's the one thing" question. I feel like there are a dozen things.
What's one of the many things?
Well, so the thing that I teach, I will say, the one thing that I teach is that you never know it all. You absolutely, being an entrepreneur, being a leader, the job is being a lifelong learner. And understanding that no matter how good you think you are, the workplace is a dynamic environment. To your point, who would have thought 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we would be living with the same kinds of consumer realities that we have today. And so if you're not there, it is impossible to be effective if you are not constantly reevaluating your own skill set. And so I believe full and wholeheartedly in that kind of a self-evaluation, and this sort of my newest thing is I'm learning to code at 52 years old, right? So the likelihood that I'm ever going to need to code myself is low, but understanding the value and the importance and what the tools are related to coding, to me seems critical, because it is a fundamental element of almost every business going forward. So from my perspective, being willing and dedicating time to continuing to learn about new things is the key beyond everything else.
Right. So, okay, what brings you joy?
Well, what brings me joy? That's another multi-layered question. I mean, at the end of the day, my family.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, I really, you know, there's this magic of having kids who are now adults, mostly formed adults, real people. And, you know, how we just had this, probably our last big family vacation. We went to a safari in Kenya and Tanzania. It was fantastic. But to be together for 17 days as a family, I mean, from my money, it doesn't get any better than that. And it was my money, and a lot of it.
Your money.
But it was.
Pay for that with the piggy bank.
Yeah, right. But you know, that I genuinely, for me, it's human relationships. That's where I get my juice from, and you know, my family's the most important human relationship I have. So,
what's a guilty pleasure for Dan Sachs?
Besides binging Netflix, probably donuts.
Probably what?
Donuts.
Donuts. Any particular kind?
Any particular kind.
Any. Cool. Very cool. So, Dan, as we close up, please, you know, I would like to I always like to leave my viewers, my listeners, with a sense of practicality. And what I mean by that is, please give our viewers or listeners something that they can go away and do today to take in what it is that you've shared and put it in action. So it's not just a podcast that they listen to in the background, but something they've actually got to go do. What would that be?
Yeah, I think, to your point, and I think we're echoing each other here, it's about really evaluating what your purpose is stepping back. And that's an ongoing iterative process, right? It doesn't stop just because you did it 2 or 3 years ago. That's something that you have to constantly evaluate. And I would do that immediately. There are lots of very practical things to do in terms of thinking about, your own mental models around what works and what doesn't work and reevaluating those. There's lots of ideas about how you treat your employees and hiring practices. I mean, there's a million things you could do today that can make a difference tomorrow. But it all starts in the end, it all starts with this understanding your vision, your purpose, and then creating policies, directives, pointing employees in a direction that follows that vision. So that's where I start every job, every consulting job I do, every training that I do, every conversation. It's about understanding and defining that clearly. And again, that's a process that goes over and over and over again because the employees change, the culture changes, not your culture, but the business climate, climate changes, and the world changes. Lord knows, things going on in the world today are not the way they were 5 years ago. And so being adaptive is critical.
Fabulous. Thank you. This has been great. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I want to thank you for everything that you've shared. Please tell our viewers and listeners where they can get a hold of you or where they can tap into all the resources that you offer.
Sure. You can go, thank you for asking. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at DePaul. You can go to themilliondollargreeting.com. I'm out and about and around. Come to Chicago and visit me. Not today, it's -3, but in general, feel free to come visit me here too.
So the website again is themilliondollargreeting.com.
Yes.
Yeah. $milliondollargreeting.com. And of course, we'll post that in the show notes along with all the other information about this show and where you can tap into the resources that Dan offers. It's been great having you here, my friend. Thank you so much again. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And I want to say to you, dear listener, please don't just listen. Information is worth the hole in the donut. And we know Dan will tell you the values of the donut. Information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation takes place when you've got application of the information. So please use what it is that you've learned. And remember that you can now chat about this show that you've been listening to or any past episodes on Facebook inside of our Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast group. Go chat about the show. Tell us what you think. Tell us to talk to each other. Say what it is you've learned and what it is you're going to do with it. And remember that the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies face the same challenge, that they're spending tons of money attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in the training and development of your talent, only to have them leave before you've got your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets within your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top, keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. And also remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple-W, just matrix like the movie .fullmontyleadership.com and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It'll help you to see the 5 areas of leadership and where you can tap into your true strength. To find out more about hiring me, Dov Barron, as your speaker or strategist for your organization, you can go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about empathy. Are you using it, or are you becoming an empath? And is that in the way of you really providing the level of service and commitment that you need? Stay curious about how you can learn from the service industry. I'm Dov Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, purpose, focus, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.